Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome to Myth of Empires. So I've probably been keeping an eye on this game for about a month or so now when I first heard about it, but I really thought it was about time we took a little bit of a closer look, a little bit more of a deep dive into looking what the game is actually about and what does it actually have to offer. I mean, from the off, the similarities to Conqueror's Blade are pretty clear. At least in the combat side of things. We're getting these large-scale siege battles, commanding AI units, building and using siege equipment, as well as the fact it's actually been developed by a Chinese studio. However, on the MMO side of things, I'd say it actually goes beyond Conqueror's Blade into a more life is feudal type game, with farming, mining and building all key professions, as you'd kind of expect from a more open world MMO. Arguably, the game also shares traits with the Mount & Blade series. You'll certainly hear similar in-game sounds, although apparently these are from a sort of a stock library, but I'm kind of really hoping they're just placeholder sounds whilst they get their own recorded. Because I can almost guarantee there'll be accusations of copying and ripping off Bannerlord and Warband in the comments, and I do get why people would say that, but given how many sort of copying games we have and Call of Duty clones we have, I'm really all for seeing more medieval games published. And I think if we're not careful, we accuse every medieval combat game of just being a copy of Bannerlord, and I don't think that's a sort of a positive thing for the genre. So yeah, I think it's always worth keeping an eye and encouraging these things on, and then we can kind of make a more accurate and sort of determined decision once the game actually gets released. In terms of the MMO side of things, the developers talk about building your own fort, and we actually see some of this going on in the trailer footage. Apparently every piece is going to be placed by the player, so each fort design should be pretty unique, which is, in theory, kinda cool. Be interesting to see though how this actually works in practice as a design feature, because quite a few games have tried to implement this sort of thing before and have kind of either backtracked or not really been able to implement it properly. Even Amazon removed free building on New World, so could be a difficult feature to actually implement into the game sort of well. As much as the game is kind of about raising your army and building your defences on your fort, you'll also be responsible for feeding your army, crafting weapons for it and armour, breeding the horses that the cavalry is going to ride. And these are sort of things that are going to be governed by your proficiency skills, and that's going to govern your effectiveness at farming, hunting, crafting and building. And this is kind of the parts of the game that to me make it feel a lot similar to Life is Feudal. Although, considering one of the main characteristics of Life is Feudal was the length of time it took to achieve anything, I think we can probably assume that it's not going to run quite along the same lines in terms of the time frame it's going to take to both sort of farm a field or craft some equipment. Given the emphasis that the game seems to be putting on this open world aspect, it does open up some interesting questions, I think, about how these battles are going to sort of come about. It's quite different to Conqueror's Blade in the sense that Conqueror's Blade focuses on instance-based battles, maybe with the exception of Territory Wars, whereas Myth of Empires is going to be an open world game with battles being fought, over other players' forts and towns. There isn't going to be a matchmaking system. And that means the game is going to be very, very reliant on having a solid and good sized player base to fill out these battles. If, after launch, say player numbers drop down a little bit, go a bit too low, then finding players to attack and initiate these battles could become a real problem. Maybe they'll add in some sort of matchmaking queue system as well, but it's certainly a bit of an area of concern. And you have to kind of ask, given how important the sort of MMO side of things is, whether a matchmaking system can realistically address those problems properly. Graphically, the game does look pretty impressive. We see a pretty decent variety of weapons and units, and the trailer obviously seems to be in third person for the most part, but the siege battles, I would say, look pretty impressive. We see a good number of troops moving around. We see a good amount of siege equipment, catapults, ballistas and other artillery firing, as well as kind of the siege towers being pushed into the walls. Kind of a shame we didn't get to see any of those siege towers actually land and kind of the troops charging at the top. That would have been pretty cool. And I'm also kind of curious to sort of see how large these siege fights can actually go. Obviously, players are going to be able to bring their own sort of AI troops with them, or at least that's my assumption. But then the question kind of becomes how many players, rather than just AI, how many actual players can go into one siege fight? What is the cap going to be? And this actually goes kind of a long way to really determine kind of how epic these battles are actually going to be. I'm also kind of wondering, since that the game is stating that you're going to be attacking other players' forts, what if that other player isn't online? Are there going to be set periods where you can attack? Or are you going to have to sort of declare war days in advance to let them know what time the battle is going to be starting and things like that? All questions that I think it would be great to find out a little bit more info on, and also see a little bit more combat footage to kind of see what this game is really going to be capable of. So all things considered, this does look like it has a lot of potential. But of course we have all been here before, and got excited for games that have turned out to be, well, a little bit crap. But from what I've heard from a few people over in China, it's a pretty experienced team that is behind the game, and they're kind of a breakaway from a much older studio. So whilst the studio may look like the new kid on the block, they should actually have a decent amount of knowledge and experience behind them that I'm kind of hoping that they're going to be able to sort of bring to bear in this game to actually turn it from what it is now to an actually exciting project. Either way, it's certainly one that I'm going to be following pretty closely, and I'm kind of hoping that we're soon going to be getting an actual date for the closed beta, because I'd love to be able to actually get in game and kind of bring you guys a bit more of an accurate opinion on what the game is currently like and if it's going to be worth playing. Plus, I'd really like to get some more up-to-date footage of the combat, check out some of the building mechanics and the MMO side of things, because that's really what makes this game stand out. There's lots of games that have this style of combat, but there's not many that truly sort of integrate that into an MMO, so you actually have good combat in an MMO, and that's kind of a rare thing. I think Conqueror's Blade really does the combat side of things pretty well. I enjoy the combat, I enjoy the game, but I don't think it really has very much of an MMO side in it really. And whilst hopefully they'll continue to work on the open world side of Conqueror's Blade, this game does fill a little bit of that void in my opinion, so certainly something worthwhile keeping an eye on. But anyway, that's all I've got time for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Certainly, as I say, we'll be having a lot more sort of details on this game as it goes forwards, particularly as we push into closed beta, so do be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all the latest Myth of Empires news. Thanks for watching guys, and I shall see you all on the next video.